It is Friday, December 27th. Let's talk PlayStation. Alright, another very interesting week for PS5 stuff, which we'll get to in a second here. But first, our PlayStation Plus reminder. The December titles are Monster Energy Supercross and Titanfall 2. These will be up until like the first week of January, actually, in all fairness. We'll find out what January's games are really soon, so not much longer there, but you still got some time. Our first news story, though, I want to cover this up real quick. I'm sure many of you have already seen this probably, but PT, the playable teaser for the canceled Silent Hills, more and more people are discovering all these crazy things about it. The YouTube channel Lance McDonald, a very cool modder that uncovered this whole world outside of that reoccurring hallway. And it's just such cool information that you can't really ignore here. When you actually mod the game to the point where you can walk outside of that looping hallway, not only does the player character fall immediately, and there's a fail-safe where Lisa will attack you right away, but what Lance did basically was set the character model to hover a little bit above the ground once he got out of the environment. You can actually see that the basic outline of Silent Hill, what you see in the cinematic trailer when you complete the demo, and we see that reveal of Norman Reedus playing the protagonist. Again, it's all canceled, but that whole world was actually fleshed out in a pretty detailed manner, far beyond what you even see in that very small little teaser trailer at the end of completing it. He walks very far out, seeing multiple cars, different models for the balconies, for the apartments. There's a bridge down the road. Really fascinating stuff, and it's just so disappointing to see that much was done, and again, it was canceled, but that was really big news for the week. Next up, we have some PlayStation Store data that has leaked what we know is now coming, but a Final Fantasy VII Remake imagery and listing was found on the PlayStation Store, so it's not available right now to download or anything like that. And we already knew basically that a demo was coming at some point, just a matter of when. Might actually be happening soon, so that's good. Final Fantasy VII Remake demo, you can actually play a good portion of the game coming up, and whenever that happens, you would imagine it would be soon, because the data is now on the PlayStation Store. And on the flip side of this, Patapon 2, which was announced quite a while ago as a native remaster port over to PlayStation 4, trophy support, those 4K visuals, because it is such a very small, artistically designed game, so just like when Loco Roco came, or Parappa the Rapper, you're getting native 4K, 60 frames, and the data is on the store for that now as well. So it's not available to purchase, but if you are a Patapon fan, it's almost here. I know Greg Miller's very excited about that one. Now, this next news story somewhat relates to what we discussed in my PS5 predictions video that we just had this past Tuesday. But the president of Bluepoint Games, Marco Thrush, had this to say when speaking to Segment Next about their relationship with Sony. The full quote, "We are an independent studio. The hardware we develop for is determined by the publisher who signs us. The MGS HD Collection and Titanfall had Xbox 360 SKUs for this reason. Various Sony studios have been great partners, most recently Japan Studio. We have a great relationship with them, and we will be happy to continue to work with them if they wish to." So when you look at what Bluepoint's done, their first game was actually original. That was Blast Factor, a PSN title for the PlayStation 3, and I believe they were ready day and date launch for the PS3. So that was like one of the first, if not the first, PSN title that you could actually download. I don't remember the exact lineup back in 2006. I think it was that and Flow. Maybe Flow came a little bit after. Either way, that was their only like really original game. Then you saw them do a bunch of HD collections from PS2 to PlayStation 3, and like Marco mentioned, they did get contracted out to do Titanfall for the Xbox 360 and the 360 version of the MGS collection. The most of the repertoire, though, is closely working with Sony, and it's always the overall umbrella is Sony, but trickling down, it's certain Sony developers that they work closely with. So, like for something like the God of War collection, they worked closely with Sony Santa Monica to finish that up. With their recent project, Shadow of the Colossus, that means they worked very closely with Japan Studio, like he's mentioning there. So I know some people are looking at that and going, "Oh, Japan Studio, From Software, Demon Souls, let's not get too jumpy right there just yet." But it's clear that they do have a very good working relationship, and that's kind of why I'm predicting that at some point the studio needs to be snatched up. And certainly, you would think that, yeah, they're independent, and they may seem like they want to stay independent, but remember, sometimes it just makes a whole lot of sense for an independent studio to, well, be acquired. Sony, as a hardware manufacturer and publisher, means that they have a lot of financial security. They have all their funding secured, but also they have a lot of talent that they can lean on from other internal Sony studios. Naughty Dog's Ice team can build certain things for the SDK that they're obviously going to have much more readily available access to. Sony can bring in a lot more people, really fund the studio, grow it to such a length where they can take on 2-3 projects at a time. They can be contracted out internally to do other stuff for other Sony studios to help with those projects and get them going. It's just all these cogs working together within Sony. And so not only would Bluepoint fit in there nicely with helping other projects, but you've got everybody doing these big budget, AAA original experiences. And then you have Bluepoint, now a dedicated developer, working on repurposing all these old games or doing remakes or doing more HD collections. Again, you can fund them up to the level where they can handle 2-3 things at a time, and I think they would be a great fit for Sony Worldwide Studios. So we'll see. Again, that's a prediction. I'm not saying that's happening. Now, with all of our minor news stories out of the way, it's time to get to our big one, the PS5 stuff. And this is where it gets pretty weird and wild, and really it's a far cry from everything we've heard about PS5 so far. And, over the holiday weekend, I thought, it's going to be really slow. There's not going to be much to talk about. Well, obviously this just happened, and so this is likely the title and thumbnail of the video. But I want to really preface this by stating, rumor, take it with a grain of salt. We really don't know where this is going in what direction. This has been the most fork in the road when it comes to all the PS5 stuff we've been hearing about so far. Admittedly, a lot of it has been pretty consistent, and it has been true up to what Sony wants to spoon feed us with the Wired.com articles. But anyway, just yesterday, a new Twitter account, and it's not even really new because this person actually has a longer history on Reddit, but another AMD part leaker, data miner, had sent out a tweet _rogue game about some of the PS5 stuff, the Oberon code name, and basically what it implies, because again this gets so deep, I don't even have my phone on me to do I should have took notes, quite honestly, but I don't have a teleprompter. But this tweet basically boils down to us learning that PlayStation 5 might actually amount to around 9 teraflops, and not necessarily the upwards of 10, 11, 12, 13 that we might have possibly been hearing. And this is right on the heels, of course, of Xbox Series X getting officially announced, and we don't have a direct teraflop number for that for that console as well. But what's really getting thrown around with Series X is that, well, it's going to be a very powerful machine. Microsoft has said as much, that they're really aiming for a very powerful console. Phil Spencer has said that they feel pretty confident on price and performance. And so a lot of people are assuming it's around 12 teraflops, and that's on the RDNA 2 microarchitecture that is the latest, going to be the latest standard coming up, and that's what a lot of people are speculating, is that might be where Microsoft's falling, which if that were the case, where it's 12 teraflops, RDNA 2, that's going to be a very powerful, fantastic machine, no doubt. Whereas on the PlayStation 5 side, we've been hearing, well, basically around the same thing, but it's super unconfirmed. And so hearing that the machine now might be 9 teraflops, and I will also state, I've been saying here for a while now, the teraflop number is not it's a decent general rule of thumb number that you can throw around, but it doesn't tell the full story in terms of SDK advancements and certain optimizations that developers like to do. This is how you see such fantastic looking games on consoles, right? That's always really the case with consoles. Even though these things are now very simplified PCs, at the end of the day, there are still optimizations, there's still advancements in the SDK, certain features. Still, there's some proprietary tech in there that Sony and Microsoft like to do. Nintendo, the same thing. When you're a console manufacturer, you do have some specialized parts in there that allows for these optimizations that we see in consoles. But still, 9, noticeably lower than what we have been hearing about when it comes to 10, 11, 12. And so a lot of people are initially very disappointed. This has got once again creating quite the conversation on Reset Era. Now, again, just to give you background on this proposed information, it's a relatively new Twitter account, but this particular user actually has about a 2-year history on Reddit as a AMD part data miner leaker, so they appear to be very credible. Some of the people that are following them, I don't know if Tom Apisak follows them, but we've talked about him previously, and I know Kamachi is on there as well. He follows this particular Twitter account, so there is a bit of a credence there that it's not necessarily BS. This is actually legitimately data mined information. It's not like it's a lie, really. It's public info if you wanted to go through the trouble of figuring this out. It's just a matter of what does it really mean and what could it possibly mean, because there's so many avenues that is being discussed about this, and that's why this is getting super complicated and muddy. If it's still based on the old Jaguar CPU now that's part of the conversation. if Sony actually had original plans to launch PlayStation 5 in 2019, but have now pushed it to 2020, which we've never really discussed on this channel. There were like one or two oddball pastebin posts. The die size is coming into play here. The actual information that was pulled from AMD, is this a dev kit? Is it a first run dev kit? Is it a revision? Is it recent? Which I don't think there's a timestamp on it as of right now as I'm recording this. This thread keeps growing like by the minute as I'm filming this, so a lot of this is really subject to change, and no other people that have previously been considered insiders, and they are insiders, and when we always say insiders, it's people that we can source information from. So I think that's the important thing here is context. The data miner, that's all we have. We don't know the context of the information they've pulled, whereas from all the insiders we've been talking to, whether it's Jason Schreier from Kotaku or some of the verified sources on Reset Era, where it's verified to the point where you can find out if they actually do have connections to somebody in the industry. That way there's a bit of a vetted process there. That's why Reset Era generally pretty good with information from there, or more believable than random posts on Reddit or Twitter or what have you, or even Pastebin, right? We can at least source it back to something. But when we hear from all these guys that PlayStation 5, very powerful piece of kit, on par with Xbox Series X, PS5 slightly more powerful, it seems a bit polarizing to now hear this completely wide U-turn of where, let's say it's around 9 teraflops. Again, not the best conversation piece to have regarding next-gen consoles, but if it's, say, 9 and Xbox Series X is at the top of the line where it's 12 teraflops, RDNA 2, the thing's absolutely packed. Yeah, Microsoft's going to come out with a decent power leverage there. It's like, some people are saying it's not negligible, some people saying it is. I've been saying it on this channel for a while now, whether one is more powerful than the other, it's not going to make a dramatic difference unless you're one of those power users that really cares about squeezing the absolute best out of your games. But I still find it laughable that anybody would like to think that a power advantage is going to guarantee the sales success of a console when there's so many other elements that mean a lot more to your average consumer, like software, for example, or the price point, or your services, or how it's marketed, how many places will it be available in comparison to your competition. There's a lot at play when it comes to the console industry, and I still find it weird that some people don't actually discuss those things when it comes to something as not nearly as significant as which console is more powerful. But if we also think about it, if this were to be true, where it's 9 teraflops, and let's even say that it is based on the old Jaguar CPU, I mean, this would actually, if anything, this would now place it in a lower price point technically, because we've been hearing for so long that based on how powerful these machines are, that a $499 price tag seems to make a lot of sense. So if we're actually looking at a machine that's not nearly as strong as we were thinking it was initially going to be, which 9 teraflops still is going to be good. It's still going to do 4K 60 frames for most games for what developers are aiming for. And then there's the other part of the conversation where Microsoft is still possibly going with Lockhart, a smaller entry point in next gen where it's even significantly lower than everything that would be available. Say Lockhart is reportedly coming in at around 4 teraflops, which this is why the teraflop number is so important, because Xbox One X is 6 teraflops, but that's based on the GCN microarchitecture. Whereas if Lockhart came in at 4 teraflops, but on RDNA 2 is a much more efficient microarchitecture, so you're getting a lot more performance out of that. And then the Lockhart would still come with an SSD standard, whatever specialized SSD that Microsoft goes with, so you get a lot more performance gains out of that, and so it wouldn't necessarily cripple game development nearly as much as people would think. So that's why the teraflop number, not the best. But again, 9 teraflops on PS5, if it were the case, we might actually look at a different price point, which would be really fascinating, that if Sony instead came out with a system that still looks really good, still looks really compelling, you're still going to see Sony first-party titles probably knocked out of the park when it comes to visual fidelity and resolution and whatever they end up looking like, but they can come out at a lower price point than, say, what Microsoft does on the Series X. That would completely change the game, right? It would look a lot different, because I think for the most part the narrative has really been that both these machines are going to come out, they're going to be both really powerful, not really going to matter which one's stronger than the other, $499, and then we're going to be talking about services and software. That's where the real battle starts, and where it makes a better argument about which one you should buy or which one you should spend most of your time on. But anyway, as I mentioned at the start of the conversation here, there are so many unknowns that there's just no way to even really cover it or talk about everything. It would be like a 40 to 50 minute some odd video to try and figure out something that, admittedly, we're probably going to find out what PlayStation 5 is really going to be in a matter of 60 some odd days if they do hold that reveal event in February. But what we can say right now, and what I can say, is that it is interesting. It's a complete U-turn. This is the first time we're really hearing about this when it comes to the where PlayStation 5 will fall in terms of power, but it also doesn't necessarily jive the most with what Sony has said about PlayStation 5 as well. For example, Mark Cerny talked about how it was basically him almost indirectly saying, we're trying to prepare you for a price tag that you might not have been familiar with or that you might not be comfortable with, by saying it will be an attractive price with the advanced technology that's inside of it, right? I think that was him low-key saying that this thing is probably going to be more than $399, which I think most consumers want, but are okay with spending a little bit more if they know it's a very powerful box. Jim Ryan at one point went on record to say that it's for their core gaming business. He went as far to call it a niche device because it may be targeting such a high spec of user. We did have only one rumor, one instance from one journalist, Zenji Nishikawa, saying that he overheard at some event, I'm sorry, I don't remember offhand, that Sony was aiming for a PS5 and a PS5 Pro day one. That was the only time we ever heard about that. I don't think there's much ground for that to stand on because it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. No, yeah, Microsoft's doing that, but the way that they're doing their system, the nomenclature kind of implies that they can do Xbox Series X, Xbox Series S, and then say 3-4 years into that generation they can do Xbox Series blank. They can just keep filling that in over and over and over again for however they want to do that. Whereas Sony, the only real nomenclature we have is it's numbered, and now we know they can do mid-cycle updates with a Pro model. Now, if you do a Pro model on day one, what do you do 3-4 years in? You might as well wait for that Pro model. I mean, do you really want to have 2 SKUs again? I think you can easily argue that 2 SKUs don't make the most sense, especially at launch. You're going to sell a lot of hardware anyway, and some people are arguing that Lockhart might actually bog developers down, which we're hearing that some developers aren't very happy with this decision. The SSD's in there, and I feel that that's still the most important thing. The SSD needs to be there as a standard. If Microsoft launched a next-gen console, or anybody launched a next-gen console with a traditional hard disk drive in there, that would actually cripple the whole generation. And if anything, that platform might even just get kicked out the door and not have software support for it because it won't have the SSD. The fact that everything has SSD, that's the good thing. But as of filming this right now, that is what we're hearing. Much different from the current PS5 narrative we've been following for a while now, and I'll always keep you posted on what changes and what comes up. But at this point, I cannot wait for February or whenever the PS5 reveal is, because I really want to find out what angle this actually ends up going towards. Now, anyway, moving on from that mess of a news story, there was so much we didn't cover too that would have took way too long. We have this controller patent recently published just yesterday from Sony Interactive Entertainment, and it looks just like a DualShock 4, pretty much exactly like a DualShock 4, except on the back, 2 very prominent impressions sticking out. That is 2 new buttons on the back, looking very much like the new back button attachment that we have for existing DualShock 4s. That's still coming late January next year. So what's going on here? Because we also had a patent earlier this month for what appeared to be, you would assume, a DualShock 5, DualShock 5 prototype, obviously a controller that Sony was working on, where it looked like a DualShock 4, but if you looked hard enough and you pointed out the differences, the key differences, it was a completely different controller. I mean, it had the same basic layout, but the bulk of that controller was a bit fatter, almost like an X1 or a 360 controller. The actual clamshell that meets was placed differently. The touchpad was noticeably larger. You didn't see the light bar on there. You could see that there was a port on the bottom for, you would assume, micro USB, or not, excuse me, USB-C. And now we have this one, which this beat for beat pretty much looks like a DualShock 4. Even at the certain images that really go in depth, where it looks in the innards of the controller, you can see underneath where the D-pad is, or you can see basically this image that I'm displaying to you right now. This is the actual touchpad component. I've taken apart plenty of DualShock 4s. This is pretty much a DualShock 4. but or it certainly appears to be, but it's got 2 buttons on the back now. And there's actually another, it's either another patent or it's one similar, because the links are hard to follow. One was, I guess, deleted, but there's one where right above the light bar is 2 little like buttons, or 2 little IR sensors or something. You don't know what it is exactly. The patents don't reference it 100%, or you can't really find a listing that talks about it. But yeah, what's going on here? I don't know. I would assume maybe this is a more finalized DualShock 5 and it actually is going to come standard with those buttons in the back, but I would think that's a bit, I don't know, I just wouldn't expect that as the base controller that would ship with every single system, and I'm still not really thinking that would be the case. The argument here is that the reason why the back button attachment is coming to DualShock 4 is so you can bring DualShock 4s forward to PlayStation 5. If this is the base controller, then you're obviously going to need a controller that has those 2 buttons standard. So in order to bring a DualShock 4 forward, you would need to purchase the back button attachment, which at $30, that means you're pretty much still going to have to spend money to bring over a DualShock 4. So I don't know, that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I can't see this being the base controller. It looks like a revision to the DualShock 4, where Sony would offer this like relatively soon, so you wouldn't have to add the back button attachment. Sony would sell this controller with it baked in, and you would see a PS4 firmware update where you can just edit that from like the quick menu and easily change it out that way, because you would assume this is not going to have a little OLED screen where you can manually change it from the controller. So on the software level of the PS4 OS, you would do it that way. So Sony would offer this controller for like $75, $80, something like that. Maybe it's a bit more refined with the sticks and buttons, so it gives off an Elite-esque controller without going in the $100 range. I don't know. It's, you know, there's only so much we can do when we're looking at very crude images from a patent, so we'll have to wait and see on this one. But I think this is something that we will see actually come to market. And we'll talk about that when it does eventually get here. Now let's get to Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code, and I would like to congratulate this user right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter to send you your code. If you would like to win a $10 PSN code, very simple, we do this every single week on Let's Talk PlayStation. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week. Those are all the news stories that I want to talk about, you all. On Tuesday, we did our annual PlayStation predictions, what I think is going to happen in 2020, and I graded myself from last year, and now it's apparent that one of my predictions may be at stake for being insanely incorrect, but we'll find out. That's the fun of it. This coming Tuesday video, I don't know what's going to happen. I do have one more unboxing left. Basically, the video's already done, filmed, edited, and all that stuff. So basically, it's on Rafter. If I don't have this current project that I'm working on ready for Tuesday, you may get that instead. So as always, be there on Tuesday for that wild card video. And that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Becker. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.